Thanks very much for that introduction, and it's really great to be here this morning, and thanks for coming to this session. I want to go straight in and give an overview of what we mean by value chains for nutrition. First of all, I want to outline what the idea is. What's the concept behind this kind of value chains for nutrition? What are we actually talking about? Well, it's difficult for some of you to see the slides, but on the top left hand, you'll see that you've got a picture of someone producing the food and someone consuming the food. And if you think about agriculture and nutrition linkages, often people are thinking about the food that is produced, how much of it is there in particular, but also the type of food, and then how that directly affects consumption. So the linkages are between agricultural production and consumption. But if we move forward to value chain thinking says that what happens in between agricultural production and consumption from farm to fork is also very, very important. How the food passes through the supply chain. Now, this kind of value chain thinking, this greater consideration of markets, has been around in agricultural development and other academic development and indeed business strategies for quite a long time now. And in that thinking, the focus is on economic value. So say you start with a cabbage at the bottom of the chain. Now then say if you produce a variety of cabbage for which you can charge a higher price, that's adding value. That's adding value to the cabbage. Now if you're a retailer and you decide to slice up that cabbage, you're also adding value to the product so that people pay more for it, and then it goes to the consumer who then pay this price. And in so doing, you are creating value for the farmers, for the retailers, for those involved in adding value to the product. And the concern in the agricultural development community has been, has enough of that value that is created, is enough of it going to the producer, is enough of it going into rural communities, and that's been their preoccupation. In value chains for nutrition, what we're saying is that value chains are a framework in which we can think about adding nutritional value, adding value for nutrition, and creating value for nutrition for the consumer of that product. That's what we're talking about in value chains for nutrition, combined with the economic value. And in so doing, we are concerned about rice and staples and the rest, but we're also particularly concerned about the nutritious foods, the micronutrient-rich foods, the fruits, the vegetables, the animal source foods, the beans, and so on. Why bother? Why think in terms of value chains when we come to nutrition? There's plenty of other concepts and frameworks out there. Here, I show a picture of a supply chain. And you can see the activities and actors through that supply chain. And a value chain is a supply chain on which value, in which we think about value. Now, there are plenty of reasons why we should be thinking about nutrition in this value chain concept, but I'm just going to give 4. The first is that we know that to improve nutrition, we need to improve the availability, the affordability of nutritious foods. In other words, we need to improve food access to nutritious foods. So that's about improving supply. And the value chain framework allows us to do that. We can go back all the way along the supply chain and everything it interacts with to look for the bottlenecks. What's stopping improved availability? What's affecting affordability? And in so doing, find the opportunities to change. And that means looking from local to global, and looking means in places we may otherwise never thought to look. And that means we might find opportunities to change that we may never have thought, here's a real lever for change. But the second reason for adopting value chains for nutrition is because we can use them to improve demand. Value chain thinking says it's not just about supply. It recognises that improving the consumption of nutritious foods is not just a supply side issue, but it's about increasing the acceptability of these foods among consumers. And we can say, in value chain thinking, we can say, how do we add value for the consumer? How do we add value for nutrition for the consumer in order to improve its acceptability by the consumer? The third reason is something we've been hearing quite a lot about in this conference, which is that we know that in nutrition we need multisectorial coordinated solutions. If you look at the supply chain there, you can see a large number of actors that crosses sectors, the public sector, the private sector, etc., etc. This is just one simple example of a supply chain. A supply chain may actually involve a producer eating the foods that they have consumed. But nevertheless, it may be another actor, another sector, that is influencing the decision made by that producer to either sell or to consume those foods. And it may involve, if you see it as a branch and you start branching out, it may involve, you may realise that one of the bottlenecks is to do with women's education, and therefore you can identify that as a key issue. So you can really look far and wide across sectors. And the fourth reason is because value chains create a framework to create economic value and value for nutrition. And what I mean by that is that you can think about nutrition as creating a solution to economic development. You can say, how does adding nutritional value add economic value? So nutrition isn't so much a problem, but it becomes a solution to some of the problems in agriculture and other sectors. You can think about them in the same frame. Now, of course, there are limitations to this approach. We recognise that. We know what these limitations are. But at the very least, it's a framework in which you can look at the trade-offs between the economic benefits and the nutritional benefits of agriculture across the value chain. So what examples do we have? Well, this is a nascent field. There's very few examples out there. We looked far and wide. If any of you guys have got some good examples, please let us know. We did find some examples from the United States. We found some examples from a range of developing countries. But there's very few out there. We were delighted to find two particularly good examples. We found several, but two particularly good examples. One of the bean value chain, which is featured in a brief produced for this conference in Uganda, and this one, orange flesh sweet potato in Mozambique. Now, what they did in this example is that they took orange flesh sweet potato vines and gave them to producers and said, you know, produce this product. But they didn't only do that. They went to consumers with health promotion messages, with mass marketing, to try and educate consumers and increase the acceptability of this product by consumers. But they didn't stop there. They went to this lady here and others like her, and they said, what are your incentives for actually selling this product? And how can we increase your incentive to sell more of this product? And they found out that by telling the traders, the small retailers, that consumers were actually willing to pay more for orange flesh sweet potato relative to other varieties, that this increased the incentives for traders to, to stock and sell the product. So that was aligning the incentives across the chain to create an effective solution. So I would argue that there's a huge opportunity. We know that the agricultural development community is focusing on value chains at the moment, a huge opportunity to build in nutrition goals. But we have to be careful. We don't want to have these value chain solutions searching for a nutritional problem because we like some kind of organisation, because we like some kind of technology. No, this has to start with a clear definition of the nutritional problem and have the value chain cater to that. We have to have explicit nutrition goals. That's very, very important to keep focus. And of course, we have to create value for nutrition. Now, you can read more about this in the background paper, which is available here, that we prepared for this conference, as well as the brief. And I'd just like to conclude by saying that value chains, that we believe that value chains can be developed to improve nutrition outcomes, while also providing solutions to development challenges in other sectors, not least in agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinna, for setting the stage and educating us on what nutrition value chains are, and reminding us to start with the nutrition in mind and not have the value chains searching for a nutrition problem. Now, I would like to invite Barbara, whom I've already briefly introduced. Barbara is going to be now looking at specifically from farm to fork, from an academic perspective, but also with a reality check in her talk. Barbara?
Thank you very much, Bibi and Corinna, for introducing me to what a value chain for nutrition means. 5 or 6 months ago, I had no real concept of how to apply a value chain, or even what it was, until I read Corinna's paper. And it's an excellent paper, which I hope you'll take advantage of getting a copy and reading it, because it very well explains, brings you along so you really understand the potential of value chains for nutrition. You've heard repeatedly in this conference so far how we have kept agriculture and nutrition and health in their own silos, and that we need to break those silos down. From my standpoint as an academic person, and as Per mentioned earlier this morning, we start with training. We need to bring into our universities, where you have international agriculture and nutrition programs, problem-solving interdisciplinary courses, and not in departments of agriculture or departments of nutrition, but in ways that bring those students from these different disciplines together in the same classroom. There's not enough of that going on in universities, although it is beginning to happen. I know at Cornell, there is very definitely a big effort to get this interdisciplinary approach in a problem-solving setting. I know at Tufts it's going on, and in a few other universities in UK and the Western world. I wonder how much is going on in the developing world, in some of the countries where the nutritional problems that we're trying to solve are the greatest. And I would hope that going away from this meeting, some of you academicians from these countries might take these concepts back and introduce them into your programs in your own countries to bring your students together in a problem-solving interdisciplinary approach. And I believe this value chain approach offers an opportunity for doing that. And so I'm very much encouraged. But, you know, I've been brought up in academia, and it's not easy to introduce interdisciplinary types of courses and training. There are barriers that have to be brought down within universities. We structure our departments around tenure for faculty. And how do young faculty members get tenure? By publishing in peer-reviewed journals. Very important. But at the same time, those faculty members who become involved in interdisciplinary types of courses face the problem. If they don't publish within their own specialty, they have difficulty sometime in getting tenure. And that is a barrier to interdisciplinary approaches. Another barrier is the fact that scientific journals tend to not publish articles that are more interdisciplinary in approach. We've got to break down that barrier that would encourage faculty members and students to publish in peer-reviewed, respected journals in both nutrition and agriculture, and that is not easy. I'd like to make another couple other remarks about this value chain. As Karina has said, up to now, nutrition has really not taken advantage of building value chains for nutrition. And we need to correct that. It would be so easy to go from the agriculture, which usually takes the value chain from the field to the market, to go from the market to the household. And there's lots of areas in that portion of the value chain in which value can be added when you look at how foods are stored and processed within the home. If we look at that and see where some of the processes are actually destroying some of the nutrients that are coming to the market in nutritious foods. But if we get it to the household, some of that may be destroyed just by inter-household processing or storage. A value chain approach will help us to identify those problem areas and seek solutions. Another thing that I would mention is that clear nutrition goals need to be documented as to what they're, using a value chain approach, if they're really having an impact. And too often, our nutrition programs do not have a good evaluation of the real nutritional and health impact of the programs that we are following. And finally, I would say that a value chain approach for nutrition certainly leads to gender considerations. After all, most of the small women farmers are not only the producers of the food, but also feeding their family. And my perception of how you get stability and sustainability into some of these programs is when you go there to the community. As Bibi says, find out what the problems are for that producer and consumer and feeder of their children, and begin developing your value chain problem identification, problem-solving approach from that context-specific area. And I believe that one of the groups closest to the community for doing that are the NGOs, both local and international. They're the ones who most know the community-level problems. And I wonder, Bibi, if there is an opportunity to build into their training value chain approaches that they can perhaps introduce into women's farming alliances and other groups to teach those women themselves how to become in evaluating their own problems through a value chain approach from the field to the fork. I'll stop there.